It was a cool, quiet morning in Carmel by the Sea when Clint Eastwood opened an email that would set the stage for one of the most talked-about talk show appearances in recent memory. The invitation was from the Ellen DeGeneres show, asking Clint to join an episode centered on the division of American values. That word, division, sat with Clint a little too long. It wasn't just the topic, it was the tone. Jake, his assistant and a former Marine, made a remark as he poured a second cup of coffee. Ellen's the type to stick a knife behind the laugh. Clint didn't reply right away. He just stared out the window, the sun casting long beams across his leather chair, old movie scripts, dusty history books, and the silver sheriff's badge his father had once given him. That badge wasn't just sentimental. It was symbolic. To Clint, justice wasn't something you discussed, it was something you lived. So when he stood up, brushed the dust off his jacket and muttered, "If they want to mock what's right, let's remind them it's not up for debate." Jake knew Clint had made up his mind. By the time Clint arrived in Burbank, the internet was already buzzing with speculation. People were predicting fireworks. Some expected Ellen to challenge Clint on his views. Others assumed he'd walk out mid-interview. But Clint wasn't rehearsing lines or planning comebacks. He sat quietly on the flight, just as he had in countless scenes over the years. Calm, centered, and unshakable. Truth, he believed, didn't need permission to be heard. When he arrived at the studio, a stylist offered him a rack of trendy jackets. Something more contemporary, they said. Clint smiled politely and declined. He wore the same weathered leather jacket he always did, with a sheriff's badge pinned on the inside. Close to his heart, not for show. Meanwhile, Ellen was preparing too, though with a different mindset. She told her producer she wanted a little tension in the segment to boost ratings. This was more than an interview. It was theater. And she was betting that a clash with a Hollywood legend would make for good television. When Clint finally walked onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. He moved with that familiar deliberate pace, like a man who had nothing to prove. He shook Ellen's hand, sat down, and offered a slight nod to the crowd. Ellen flashed her signature wide smile, but Clint noticed right away, it didn't reach her eyes. The conversation began innocently enough, with Ellen complimenting Clint's career and influence. But it quickly turned. She asked if he felt out of step with where America was headed. Clint didn't flinch. "America doesn't move in one direction," he said calmly. "It moves where people with backbone lead it." There was a shift in the room. The energy tightened. Ellen pressed further, suggesting Clint was holding on to an America that no longer existed. "Some things aren't meant to be outgrown," he replied after a pause. "They're meant to be upheld." The audience grew silent, not the awkward silence of boredom, but the charged kind that meant people were really listening. Ellen tried to pivot. She asked whether America still needed cowboys and sheriffs, dismissing them as outdated mythology. Clint leaned in, his voice low and firm. "When the law turns into a joke, sometimes the only thing between chaos and order is a man who still believes it matters." You could hear a pin drop. Ellen chuckled nervously and replied, "Well, passion without progress is just stubbornness." Clint didn't blink. "Progress doesn't mean abandoning your soul," he said, with a quiet that cut deeper than any shout. Backstage, producers were whispering. "He's flipping the room," someone muttered. A young technician leaned over and said, "Why does Clint sound more honest than half the guests we book?" But the storm was just building. Ellen grew more pointed, questioning Clint's compassion and implying that he was unwilling to see the world change. Clint's answer landed like a gut punch. "Compassion without truth is just another kind of lie." The audience stirred, murmurs rippling through the room. Something was happening. The usual narrative wasn't sticking. Trying to regain control, Ellen brought up the next generation, saying perhaps it was time to let younger people lead. Clint didn't argue. He simply said, "The next generation needs roots, not just wings." And with that, the mood in the studio turned completely. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't watching a culture clash. They were witnessing something real, something grounded. The producers scrambled to pivot. But it was too late. The conversation had already slipped out of Ellen's control. When the show cut to commercial, the backstage area was dead quiet. No laughter. No idle chatter. A senior producer was already on the phone, trying to salvage what was left of their carefully planned segment. Jake came up to Clint, phone in hand, and said, "You're trending." Clint adjusted his jacket and tapped the badge pinned inside. "Not about trending," he said. "It's about standing." Clint's segment went viral. Clips of his calm strength and unapologetic wisdom spread across social media like wildfire. People from all walks of life, left, right, apolitical, shared the moment. News outlets debated whether old-fashioned values were making a comeback. In diners, libraries, and barbershops, people weren't just watching Clint, they were talking about him. About what it means to have principles. About standing your ground when the world demands you bend. The fallout was swift. Ellen's team issued a vague apology for the tense exchange. Sponsors pulled ads. Ratings dipped. And Clint? He declined most interview requests, refusing to cash in on the moment. He had said what he needed to say. His silence afterward only made his words echo louder. He had reminded millions that real strength doesn't come from volume, it comes from conviction. That sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not yell, but stand. In an era obsessed with outrage and attention, Clint Eastwood reminded America that dignity, truth, and resolve are never out of style. The world may have moved on, but there's still something timeless about a man who walks onto a stage, says what he believes, and walks off unchanged. No theatrics. No branding. Just belief. Thanks for watching. If this moment resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and share where you're tuning in from in the comments below. Because sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the quiet one that refuses to kneel.